Audiobooks and beyond.
The Last Transmission, narrated by Matthew Oliver. The silent hum of the air recyclers was a constant lullaby. For Commander Caleb Archer, it was the sound of home. It was the sound of the lunar gateway, a beacon of human tenacity perched on the edge of a great black chasm of space. His home was a web of pressurized habitats and maintenance tunnels, a small outpost for 15 souls in a cold, empty sky. His job, his purpose, was to be the welcoming hand in the darkness. He was the one who guided the ships in, the one who made sure the umbilical lines connected, the one who guaranteed the flow of priceless fuel from the moon's frozen regolith. They called the fuel stardust, a fitting name for the crystalline substance they harvested from the moon's poles. It was the key to deep space. Earth ships would land, replenish their tanks with stardust, and then launch again, with enough power to reach destinations mankind had only dreamed of. The gateway was the first step on the ladder to the stars, and Caleb was the keeper of that step. The gateway was built in a prime location, a crater near the moon's south pole where the highest concentration of stardust was found. The downside was that for 1 week each year, due to the station's orbital path, communications with Earth would cease entirely. Scientists had predicted this annual blackout, but the resource yield was too valuable to pass up. The crew knew this week was coming. Life was a serene monotony, a predictable cycle of ship landings, maintenance checks, and the quiet camaraderie of a small crew. There was Dominic Cross, the gruff but kind base commander, Dr. Lena Petrova, brilliant and eccentric biologist, and a dozen others, each an essential part of the living machine that was their base. They were family, forged in the crucible of isolation and the shared purpose of a grand mission. The view from the observation dome was a constant reminder of that purpose. The crescent of Earth hung in the blackness, a marble of blue and white, beautiful and terribly, terribly far away. Today was a landing day. The Persephone, a standard cargo hauler from Earth, was on approach. Its signal was clear, its flight path normal, its purpose mundane: resupply and refuel. Caleb sat at his console in the command center, the familiar cadence of his voice guiding the ship in. "Persephone, you are cleared for descent. Maintain present vector. Our guidance beacon is live." Static was the only response. He frowned, tapping a control. "Persephone, this is Lunar Gateway. Do you read?" "Confirming descent vector." Still nothing, just a faint hiss. "Possible comms malfunction," Dominic said from his own console, his voice a low rumble. "Their automated systems are still locked onto our beacon. She'll come in fine." Caleb nodded, though a small, cold knot of unease had formed in his stomach. A comms malfunction was rare, but not impossible. The Persephone's trajectory was perfect. The ship was a ghost on his radar screen, a silent echo of 1,000 previous landings. As it drew closer, the base's external cameras provided a visual. It looked exactly as it should: a sleek, silver hull, the logo of Earth's Space Alliance painted on its side. "Locking final approach," Caleb announced, his fingers dancing across the console, bracing for touchdown. He watched the monitor as the Persephone descended, its landing thrusters firing with perfect, silent precision. It settled on the designated landing pad with a gentle thud. The automated systems immediately began the process of extending the refueling and cargo umbilicals. The silence was deafening. No disembarkation ramp extended. No crew emerged. The small access airlock remained firmly shut. "All right, boys," Dominic said. "Suit up. I don't like this one bit. Caleb, you're with me." Caleb and Dominic suited up with a grim tension. They cycled through the airlock and crossed the cold, silent regolith toward the motionless ship. The tension was palpable. The lack of response from the Persephone was unsettling. Reaching the ship, they attached a manual airlock pump to its hatch and began the process of forcing it open. The hiss of depressurization was the only sound in the vacuum. When the hatch finally unsealed, they were met not with silence, but with a wave of relief. 4 crew members, their faces pale and drawn, were huddled inside the airlock. They were alive. "Thank the stars you're here," one of them said, his voice shaky over the comms. "We lost comms and power to the airlock after a rough patch through a meteor shower. Couldn't get the door open. We've been stuck without electrical for hours." Caleb felt the knot of fear in his stomach unravel. "Welcome to the gateway," he said, his voice thick with relief. "We'll get you all back to the hab. We'll run full diagnostics on your ship later." They led the 4-person crew back to the base, a sense of camaraderie and shared relief filling the halls. The crew from Earth, including their quiet captain, explained that all systems on their ship, except for the life support, had gone dark. The next day passed with the moon base's technical crew unable to diagnose the mysterious failures on the Persephone. It was a complete puzzle. With the annual blackout having just begun, comms were now down with Earth, leaving them isolated. The ship's crew had no choice but to stay. The 14 souls of the lunar gateway were now 19, trapped together for the long, silent week ahead. The first day after the Persephone's arrival passed with a sense of relief and quiet celebration. The lunar gateway crew, starved for new faces and new stories, welcomed the newcomers. They gathered in the observation dome, sharing freeze-dried meals and rehydrated drinks, trading tales of life on Earth and in deep space. Jason, the captain of the Persephone, was a man of few words, but his crew was lively, full of jokes and stories about their journey. For a few brief hours, the isolation of the moon seemed to melt away. The 19 souls of the gateway were a new, larger family. The second day, however, a subtle change began to creep in. A soft flicker of the lights in the main corridor, a brief power surge that lasted only a second. Everyone laughed it off as a system hiccup, but a new, quiet uneasiness settled over the crew. Captain Jason kept to himself more, his eyes scanning every face with a paranoid intensity. The gateway crew found themselves watching the 4 newcomers from Earth, subtle questions hanging in the air. The lack of communication with Earth made the rumors grow. The first incident was small, almost unnoticeable. One of the gateway crew, a technician named Kenji, failed to show up for his shift. A quick search located him in a rarely used maintenance tunnel, slumped against a wall. His face was pale and clammy, his eyes wide and vacant, as if he had seen a ghost or died of pure terror. There were no marks on him, no signs of struggle. Dr. Lena Petrova, the base's medical officer, could find no cause of death. She called it a cardiac event, but her hands trembled as she said it. The crew held a quiet, somber service, but a new, unspoken dread had taken root. The true horror began a day later. An engineer, working alone in the comms room, started screaming. The sound was not of pain, but of a horrifying, inhuman distress. Caleb, Dominic, and several others rushed to the room, but the door was locked from the inside. They could hear a series of sickening snaps and cracks, followed by a wet, gurgling sound. When they finally broke the door down, they found a gruesome scene. The engineer was on the floor, his body writhing in a grotesque dance. His skin was stretched and paper-thin, revealing the outline of his bones. His chest, once a solid mass, was now a concave ruin. With a final, sickening crunch, his ribs seemed to bend inward. The scream stopped, but he wasn't dead. His limbs began to move, twitching and jerking with a new, unnatural purpose. The crew stood frozen, their faces a mixture of terror and disbelief. Dominic was the first to act, his voice a raw command. "To the infirmary, now." They rushed the writhing engineer down the corridor, his body convulsing in their arms. As they moved, the engineer's face began to change, his features blurring and twisting into something unrecognizable. His eyes rolled back, empty and black. From deep within his throat, a low, guttural growl emanated, a sound that was a parody of human speech. Dr. Petrova was already waiting in the infirmary, her face a mask of shock and horror. As they laid the engineer on the medical bed, a member of the Persephone crew, his eyes wide with fear, stumbled back. "What is that?" he whispered, his voice trembling. The question ignited a firestorm of panic and blame. "What is that?" Caleb's voice was a low growl, his eyes fixed on the man from the Persephone. "It came with you. Everything was fine until your ship arrived. This is your fault." Panic erupted. The Lunar Gateway crew, their calm camaraderie gone, turned on the newcomers. Accusations flew, fueled by fear and the undeniable coincidence of the events. The silent crew members of the Persephone looked on, their faces mirroring the terror of the Gateway crew. This was a horror they had never faced. The base was in a state of chaos. Dominic, his voice trembling, tried to restore order. "It's a virus. It must have come with the ship. It's some kind of pathogen." He was looking for a logical explanation, a scientific term to make sense of the madness, but no one was listening. The crew tried to quarantine themselves, but it was too late. They watched in horror as more of their friends and colleagues began to succumb to the same fate. One by one, their bodies would go limp, their eyes would glaze over, and a terrifying low moan would escape their throats. For a brief, agonizing moment, they appeared dead, a stillness that was broken by the sickening, jerky reanimation that followed. They would rise, their joints bending at unnatural angles, their skin stretched taut over their bones. They became what the terrified crew could only call zombies, mindless shells of their former selves, driven by a violent, unknown impulse. This impulse was a horrifying drive to seek out and consume the living. At first, they were slow, shambling, their movements clumsy and uncoordinated, as if their new bodies were alien to them. But they learned. They began to navigate the corridors with a purpose, their blank eyes fixed on the surviving crew members. The low growls that had been a simple sound of distress turned into a hunting chorus. They used their unnatural strength to break through doors and smash equipment, their only goal to get to the living. The surviving crew realized with gut-wrenching dread that these weren't just infected people, they were something new and deadly, and the very air they breathed had become their enemy. Soon only 4 people remained: Caleb, Dominic, Dr. Petrova, and Captain Jason of the Persephone. They had barricaded themselves in the command center. This area, designed as a central command hub, was the most heavily fortified section of the base. Its blast doors were triple reinforced, designed to withstand a direct meteor strike, and its air filtration system was separate from the rest of the base. For now, they were safe. The scraping sounds of the zombies outside the blast doors were a constant, terrifying reminder of their predicament, but they could not break in. The 4 survivors sat in a terrified silence, the rhythmic, scraping sounds of the zombies outside the blast doors a constant reminder of their predicament. Jason, the captain of the Persephone, broke the silence. He looked at Caleb, his face grim. "It's not a virus," he said, his voice a low whisper. "It's me. It's my fault." Caleb and Dominic stared at him, their faces a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "My crew and I were on a secret mission. We were testing a new element, a rare earth mineral. It's meant to have incredible biological applications, but we had to test it in a truly isolated environment. They chose the moon. We were supposed to dump a small sample from our ship, see how it reacted with the lunar regolith, and document the results. When we lost comms and power and couldn't get the door open, it was me. I did that as part of our mission to provide a plausible reason for our delay. I had a second sample with me in a secure canister, but it must have ruptured during the meteor shower. The element, it must have gotten into the ship's air supply. He paused, a look of despair on his face. It's a catalyst. It doesn't kill. It mutates. It turns any organic matter it touches into a host. It gets into the brain and rewrites it. It makes a person into that. He motioned with his head toward the door, where a low growl could be heard. The element is volatile. They'll get more aggressive the longer they're trapped. We have to get to the ship and escape the moon. We have to do it now. The four of them worked in a frantic, desperate rhythm. Jason laid out a blueprint of the base on a console. The airlock is our only option, he said, his finger tracing a path on the schematic. The main corridor is swarming. We'll have to go through the auxiliary vents. It's a tight squeeze, but it's the only way to bypass them. We'll be exposed, Dr. Petrova whispered, her voice tight with fear. We have no choice, Dominic said, his hand on Caleb's shoulder. Caleb, you lead. You know these tunnels better than anyone. Jason, you stay in the back. Your mission is to fix that ship. You're our only way off this rock. The plan was simple, desperate, and their only hope. They would move as a single unit, a silent, terrified procession. Caleb would clear the path, Dominic would provide cover, and Jason and Dr. Petrova would follow. The four of them made a desperate dash for the airlock. They burst from the command center, the reinforced door sealing with a clang behind them, a cold comfort against the growing chorus of moans. They moved in a tight formation, their boots clanking on the metal floor, a sound that seemed deafening in the echoing, deserted tunnels. The emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows, making every corner a potential hiding place for a nightmare. They kept their heads down, running, until they rounded a bend and came to a dead stop. The auxiliary vent system they needed to take was completely blocked. A barricade of twisted pipes and collapsed scaffolding lay in their path, and from the darkness of a side tunnel, a figure emerged. It was Kenji, his body twisted, his movements a horrifying parody of a run. He was not alone. Behind him, shambling from the shadows, were two more of their former colleagues, their faces pale and their eyes vacant. The zombies were silent except for the low, predatory growl that vibrated through their chests. They were a hunting party, and their prey was trapped. Caleb's mind raced. He pulled out a fire extinguisher, the only thing they had that could be used as a weapon, and aimed it, but Kenji was faster. He lunged at Dr. Petrova. She screamed, a high-pitched sound of pure terror. But Dominic, his face grim with resolve, intercepted the blow. The zombie crashed into Dominic, and they both fell to the floor. A guttural groan from Dominic's mouth as he was dragged away by the zombie. A silent, heartbreaking plea for help that was never spoken. He was gone. The remaining three were frozen in place for a horrifying moment. The other zombies, alerted by the sound, began to converge on the tunnel. Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs. The fear was a physical force, a weight in his chest. Jason, his face a mask of grim determination, grabbed Caleb's arm. "Move. Now," he hissed. They had no time to mourn. Dominic's sacrifice was their window. They had to take it. The sound of the hunting chorus grew louder behind them, a chorus of moans and scraping feet, a symphony of their coming doom. They made their way into the airlock, the sounds of the zombies echoing behind them. The three of them scrambled for the airlock door, its heavy metal frame representing a final sliver of hope. They were almost there, just feet away, when a zombie, its features horribly contorted, slammed against the transparent viewport. Its grotesque face pressed against the glass, eyes black pits of pure hunger. Another zombie, one of the former Persephone crew, appeared behind it, its hands scraping against the metal. Dr. Petrova was fumbling with the manual override, her fingers shaking with panic. Caleb and Jason were shouting, urging her on, their voices desperate, but it was too late. From the corridor behind them, a new wave of zombies, more aggressive and faster than the others, appeared. Dr. Petrova let out a piercing shriek as one of them, a familiar face from the Lunar Gateway crew, grabbed her from behind. She was pulled away, her body thrashing, her screams muffled by the sickening sounds of the other zombies. Caleb and Jason could only watch in horrified silence as their last remaining companion was taken down. They slammed the door shut, the finality of the clang deafening in the silence. They were safe, for now. They then ran through the quiet regolith to the ship, which was still in the same spot they had left it. With their lives on the line, they worked together, the captain frantically fixing the ship's systems while Caleb kept watch, his eyes darting around the moon's surface. With a final jolt, the engines whirred to life. They were escaping. As the Persephone lifted off from the lunar surface, Caleb felt a wave of relief wash over him. They had survived. They had escaped the moon, the zombies, and the horrifying truth of the element. He looked at the captain, his face stained with dirt and tears. They were alive, and the horrifying base they were leaving was probably lost forever. As the ship entered Earth's final approach, a sense of relief washed over them. Comms crackled to life, but with a strange, distorted signal. The ship's automated docking systems whirred to life, a familiar, welcome sound. They could see the lights of a sprawling city below, a comforting tapestry of white and gold. The landing was perfectly smooth, the thrusters guiding the ship onto a large, empty platform. They had made it. They were home. The hum of the ship's engines died down, and a profound silence fell. They waited for the ground crew, for the docking instructions, for the familiar welcome. But nothing came. A full minute passed, then two. Jason leaned over the comms console, his brow furrowed in confusion. He tried to hail the tower, to get a status update, but all he got was static. A feeling of unease began to creep into the cabin, a cold knot forming in Caleb's stomach. Something was wrong. Caleb felt a burning sensation on his leg. He looked down and saw a dark, red mark on his calf, with 3 small, dark points surrounding a larger cut. It looked like a bite. His heart seized in his chest, a cold, crushing wave of dread washing over him. The relief he'd felt moments ago evaporated, replaced by the bitter, agonizing certainty of his own doom. He had made it this far, sacrificed so much, only to carry the plague with him. He was the one to bring the end to what remained of his home world. A cold sweat broke out on his brow, and his breath hitched in his throat. He looked at the captain, but he wasn't responding. He was working frantically on the ship's systems, his face grim. Caleb, in a desperate final act of hope, wiped the dirt from the cut and realized that it wasn't a bite. It was a clean cut from a piece of twisted metal he had scrambled past to get on the ship. Relief washed over him like a tsunami. They had to get off the ship. They had to find a living soul. With a silent agreement, Jason manually disengaged the airlock. They stepped out onto the landing pad, the cool, sterile air of Earth filling their lungs. From the shadows of the deserted landing bay, they saw them. At first, it was just a few dark shapes, shuffling out from behind crates and machinery. Then more appeared, their silhouettes becoming clearer in the dim light. They were workers, ground crew, moving slowly, methodically toward the ship. Caleb and the captain felt a wave of hope. They had made it. They were safe. But as the shapes drew closer, a cold dread returned. The men and women were covered in a thin layer of grime, their clothes torn and their faces ashen. Their eyes were vacant and black, and their movements were jerky and unnatural. The element had been released on Earth while they were gone. They had escaped the moon, only to land in the heart of the apocalypse. And now, they faced not a handful of zombies, but a silent, monstrous army, shambling toward them under the pale, indifferent sky of a dead planet.